Namaskaram. Before I start to answer questions today, there's one other thing I'd like to talk about. Last week, David Godman happened to write an email to another friend and myself, in which he mentioned that he had been asked a question about the answer that Bhagavan gave to the second question of the second chapter of Upadēśa Mañjari. So I wrote to him about that, and he referred to what I had said, but what he said was not exactly as I had written it. And I felt that it was afterwards a friend sent me a link and said, "Oh, did you see what David had said? David quoted you or something." So I watched that portion, and what he said was not exactly as I had written it. So I just want to clarify a little bit more about this. That is, first I'll read what I had written to David, and then I'll say something more about it. What I wrote to David was, I once asked Swami Nathanananda about how we should understand that answer that Bhagavan gave him to the second question of the second chapter of Upadēśa Mañjari. And I remember he became very animated in giving his answer. He said something to the following effect: "Have no doubt at all about this. Anyone who is attracted to the simple practice of Atma-vichara that Bhagavan has taught us has sufficient pakva." Pakva means maturity, or fitness. The others that Bhagavan referred to are only those who are not attracted to this practice. So for them, other practices have to be prescribed. That's what Swami Nathananda said. But he also explained a bit more. In continuation of what I wrote to David, I said, he also explained that at the time he asked these questions, he was still having doubts about his own fitness to follow this path. So Bhagavan convinced him gently by explaining about all the other paths, and thereby made him understand that none of them appealed to him, and that the only path that appealed to him was Atma-vichara. Eventually, to remove all his doubts about his fitness, Bhagavan replied to one of his questions about fitness by asking him what path his heart is drawn to. And when he replied Atma-vichara, Bhagavan said, "Then this alone is the path to which you are suited." So that is what I wrote to David, but I'll just enlarge upon this a bit more. That is, most of the, I'm not sure when Upadēśa Mañjari was first published, but most of the questions in it and answers that Swami Nathananda received were questions he asked very early in the time he came to Bhagavan. He had compiled this work before it came to be published. So he first came to Bhagavan when Bhagavan was still in Skandashram. In those days, Nāṉ Ār had never been published. Bhagavan hadn't written Āṉma-Viddai or Upadēśa Undiyār. Upadēśa Undiyār is the Tamil original of Upadēśa Saram, or Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. So there was very little available in print on what Bhagavan's teachings were. The main things that were available were Arunachala Stuti, most of Arunachala Stuti Panchakam was available by that time. But other than that, most people didn't have a very clear understanding of what Bhagavan's teachings were. And the main work on his teachings was Ramana Gita, which was in Sanskrit, and at that time there was no Tamil translation available. Nathanananda, because he couldn't understand Sanskrit, he once asked Bhagavan about Ramana Gita, and he said, "Bhagavan, everyone says this is the important book of your teachings, and all your teachings are contained in this book, but I'm not able to understand Sanskrit. So can you tell me what's written in it?" And Bhagavan simply smiled and said, "Oh, it's nothing." He said, "Some years ago, they wanted me to agree to their views. And so they put questions to me to try to get me to approve of their ideas. He was talking about their ideas, referring particularly to their ideas about Shakti and Siddhis and so on. They tried to pull me down to their level. I didn't budge, and so they failed in their attempt. But just like a circus acrobat, if a circus acrobat makes a misstep, and maybe he's, for example, walking on a tightrope or something, and he slips and falls, he will do a double somersault and make it look like it's part of the act. So rather than admitting defeat, Kavyaganta wrote Ramana Gita, in which he recorded some of the things that were said at that time. And so Bhagavan more or less told him, this isn't the real teaching, this isn't his real teaching. As I say, there was very little available to know, for people to understand what is the real teaching of Bhagavan. And because people had different ideas about what Bhagavan's teachings were, Nāṇ was naturally confused because different people told him different things. So it was in that spirit that he asked most of the questions in Upadēśa Mañjari. So one of the things that many people were saying is, Bhagavan's teachings are very lofty. They're not for ordinary people. Nobody can follow the path that Bhagavan is teaching. That was some of the people around him were saying at that time. So even Murugan was told that when he first came to Bhagavan. Murugan came a few years later in 1923, I think, first. He was told by a fellow devotee, Bhagavan's teachings are very lofty, you can't understand them. No one can practice them, so it's best to go to Nāṉ Ār and get mantra diksha. So there were these sort of ideas people had in those days. So Nāṇ as a young man, he was well educated in Tamil, but he didn't know Sanskrit and he didn't know English, so he only knew Tamil. And he was naturally confused by all the different things people were saying. So it was from that perspective that he asked these questions. Regarding this, what he told me about this particular question, the question he asked Bhagavan is, this vichara marga, in the vichara margam, ella adhikarigalalum anushtika ilum. Is it possible for all adhikaras, that people of adhikāra means the qualification, having the adhikāra. Adhikara means the qualification to follow a path. So is it possible for all adhikaras to follow this path of vichara? And Bhagavan replied, according to what he recorded, was pakva ke ilam. It's possible only for those who have pakva, who have sufficient maturity. Enio tattam mana nilai kuriya sadhanangalil paraka vendam. Others, according to their respective mental state, they should practice sadhana. So whatever sadhanas are suitable to their mental state, they should practice. Then Nāṇ went on to ask, what are the other practices? And then Bhagavan talks about tuti, stotra, that is stuti, japa, dhyana, yogam, and jnanam. But jnanam, he's talking, he talks about that. This is the main vichara. So the other parts he talked about were stuti and japa and dhyana and yoga. So when Bhagavan gave that answer, what Nāṇ understood is, that is what he felt when he heard Bhagavan describing about the other paths, is that none of them appealed to him. The only path he wanted to practice was vichara. So he felt that indirectly Bhagavan was telling him, you are meant only for vichara, but he still had doubt about this, particularly because of what other people were saying. So though he wanted to follow the practice of path of vichara, he still had doubts, and those doubts persisted for some time after that. Now and then he would again ask Bhagavan questions about fitness. And eventually Bhagavan said to him, asked him this question: of all the paths, what is the path that appeals to you? And he said, only vichara appeals to him. And Bhagavan said, then that alone is the path for which you're suited. He understood in retrospect that the answer Bhagavan had given at first, in which he described the other practices, this Bhagavan, that is what Natyananda explains, it. Bhagavan's way of teaching is very, very subtle. Bhagavan will not say things, often will not say things directly, but he will say things in a way to make people come to their own conclusion. So by describing the other paths, which didn't at all appeal to Natyananda, that was Bhagavan's subtle way of telling him, these other paths are not for you. If these paths were meant for you, you'll be attracted to these paths. Since these paths are not meant for you, you're not attracted to them. The only path you're attracted to is vichara, therefore vichara is the path meant for you. So that is what Natyananda said. What he was explaining was about Bhagavan's subtle way of teaching. But as I say, what is recorded, all that is not recorded in Upadēśa Mañjari. What he's recorded in Upadēśa Mañjari is just the first time he asked that question and the answer that Bhagavan gave at that time. Bhagavan could have said at first, if you're attracted to this path, this is the path for you. He could have said at first, but in order to bring that message home to him, Bhagavan wanted him to arrive at his own conclusion on that. So Bhagavan, instead of saying that directly, he said, no, this is only for those who are pakva, who have sufficient maturity. The Tamil word pakva with an ir on the end, means pakvi, one who has pakva, who has maturity, who has fitness. So rather than, Bhagavan said, this path is meant only for those who have fitness. For others, other paths are there according to their mental state. There Bhagavan is indicating a path that is suitable for each person is a path that is suited to their mental state. So they'll be naturally attracted to the path for which they are suited. That is the implied meaning of what Bhagavan said. And what Bhagavan said is true. This path is only for those who have pakva, because those who don't have pakva will not be attracted to this path. So there's no question of their following this path. But what is the required pakva? That is what I asked Natyananda, why didn't you ask Bhagavan, what is the required pakva? And Natyananda laughed and said, yes, in retrospect, that is what I should have asked. But since he talks about other paths, I asked him about those other paths, and he replied accordingly. And when he said so, I felt none of these paths appealed to me. The only path that appeals to me is the chara. But he half understood Bhagavan's teaching, but he still had a doubt about it. That's why eventually Bhagavan had to say to him explicitly, what is, of all the paths, what path appeals to you? And when he said vichara, then Bhagavan laughed and said, well, that is the path for which you're suited. So Natyananda was what he was explaining to me was how Bhagavan will often not give a direct answer. But the reason he doesn't give a direct answer is not because he's evading giving a direct answer, because by giving an indirect answer, he enables the devotee to come to their own understanding. So it's a more powerful way of teaching. That is what Natyananda explained to me. I also asked him whether he had ever asked Bhagavan explicitly, because obviously on that time he didn't ask explicitly what is the pakva required, whether he had ever asked that. And Natyananda said, no, it wasn't necessary for him to ask that, because Bhagavan had already made it clear to him. That is, as time went on, Bhagavan made it clear to him. But what is the pakva required? The only pakva required is a sincere liking to follow this path and a clear understanding. This is another thing Natyananda said. He said that we need to clearly understand what is the goal. The goal of Vedanta is dukkha nivritti, sukha prapti, removal of misery and attainment of happiness. Happiness means infinite happiness, infinite and eternal happiness. So So we need to understand that is the misery, but the happiness that we want to attain is our own nature. We are always infinite happiness, as Bhagavan says in the beginning of the first paragraph of Nāṉ Ār. So our real nature is infinite happiness. So the happiness we are to attain is what is our own nature. In other words, there's nothing new to be attained, and the misery. And since our real nature is infinite happiness, there is no such thing as misery. So the non-existent misery we have to remove, and the ever-existent happiness we have to attain. So we need to understand that. And we need to understand that since as Bhagavan says in the first paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, since happiness is our real nature, tanne tan aridal vendum, oneself, knowing oneself is necessary. That is the only means to attain happiness and thereby remove all misery, is to know what we actually are, because what we actually are is happiness. And for that, as Bhagavan says in the second sentence of the first paragraph of Nāṉ Ār, the concluding sentence of that paragraph, adiku nana innum jnana-vichāramai mukhya sadhanam. The awareness, the jnana-vichara, the awareness investigation, who am I, called who am I, it alone is the principal means, mukhya sadhanam. That is, whatever other path we may follow, sooner or later we need to come to this path, because this is the only means. So what he understood, what Nathananda said he had understood from Bhagavan, is that the only pakva required is that we must have a sincere liking to follow this path, and also a clear understanding that this path is the only means to put an end to all misery and attain infinite eternal happiness, which is our own real nature. So, as I say, I just wanted to say that to put in, to give a more context of what David would have told you last time. So, Nathananda was emphasizing Bhagavan's very subtle way of teaching. Bhagavan often won't say things directly, but he will make people understand, make people see for themselves. So it was very interesting what Nathananda said. Oh, and one other thing to add in this context, when I asked Nathananda about this, I myself didn't have any doubt about this, because before reading that, I'd already read in Upadēśa Undiyār, Bhagavan says in verse 17 of Upadēśa Undiyār, Manati nuruve maravadu chava manamenu mondrilayoni para makam nerakam idoni para. Or in Sanskrit, manasam tukim magane krite neva manasam magamajavat. So Bhagavan is saying, if we investigate the form of the mind, we will find there's no such thing as mind at all. This is the direct path for everyone. In Tamil, he says, Ākum nerakam. Ākum means for anyone, for everyone, for anyone whomsoever, for everyone. So why does Bhagavan say there for everyone? And on other occasions, as in Upadēśa Mañjari, he says it's only for pakvas. The truth is, this path is for everyone. But though this path is, this is the only direct path for anyone, whosoever. There's no other path that is as direct. There's no other path by which we can, whatever other path, all the other paths are more indirect, and eventually they must lead to this path. Because how can we experience the infinite happiness that we actually are without knowing what we actually are? And how can we know what we actually are without investigating ourselves? In order to see something, you need to look at it. In order to see what we actually are, in order to attain Swarupa Darshanam, we need to look at ourselves. We need to attend to ourselves. So ultimately, this is the only means by which we can we can know what we actually are, and thereby eradicate ego. And when ego is eradicated, all misery is eradicated along with it, because misery exists only for ego. So Bhagavan made it very, very clear. This is the direct path for everyone. But since not everyone has yet had the maturity to be attracted to this path, for people who are not attracted to this path, that's what the people that Bhagavan referred to as others in that answer. Those others are those who are not attracted to this path. If we're attracted to this path, this is the path for us. So if we sincerely want to know who am I, this is the path for us. If we are interested in other goals, then there are other paths for other goals. But if you want to know who am I, what do we have to do? We have to investigate who am I. It's as simple as that. And anyone who wants to know who am I, the very fact that you want to know who am I means you have the pakva required to investigate yourself. Because investigating ourselves, as Bhagavan said, it is not difficult. This is the easiest of all paths. In the fourth verse of Āṉma-Viddai, as I say, when Nāṇ Ār asked these questions, it was before Bhagavan had composed Atma-Viddai or Upadēśa Undiyār or Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, or but before Bhagavan had given the answers to Śrī Pillai of Nāṉ Ār many years earlier, but it had not been published. It wasn't published until about 1922 or 23. So Nāṇ Ār came before that. So he didn't know any of these. But in 1927, Bhagavan wrote both Atma-Viddai and Upadēśa Undiyār Murugan's request. And the following year, 1928, he wrote Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu Murugan's request. So these are the key works of Bhagavan's teaching. So what Bhagavan says in the fourth verse of Āṉma-Viddai, that is the Murugan had composed the Pallavi and the Anupallavi, the refrain and the sub-refrain. In the refrain, Murugan says, Aye Ati Sulapum. Āṉma-Viddai Aye Ati Sulapum. That is, so very easy. It's extremely easy. Āṉma-Viddai means Atma-Vidya, extremely easy. And in the Anupallavi, he says oneself, Atma means oneself. What exists as real is oneself. It's so clear, it's so clear that even the nelikai in the hand is unclear by comparison. Nelikai means an amlaka. Amlaka in the hand means something that is an idiom to refer to something that is very, very clear, very, very obvious. So even that is unclear compared to, that is, I am. What is clearer than I am? Even for the dullest of ordinary people, everyone knows I am. So it's so clearly known. So what Bhagavan says in the fourth verse of Āṉma-Viddai is, karmadi kattu sorry, and I can't pronounce the tongue, but what he says is to untie the bonds of karma, etc., and to bring an end to birth and so on. Emmagam adinam, more than any path, immagam mikkelidu. This path is extremely easy. So Bhagavan is saying this is the easiest of all paths. So we need have no doubt about this. That is, it is possible for anyone who is aware, I am, we are qualified to follow this path. Once someone came to Bhagavan and said, Bhagavan, am I qualified to follow this path? And Bhagavan said, what did you ask? You said, am I qualified? If you're aware of yourself as I, then you're qualified to investigate I. So yes, so Bhagavan often assured people that they are qualified. From Nāṇ Ār, because he wanted to root out the underlying causes of Nāṇ Ār's doubts, Bhagavan went in a more indirect way so that Nāṇ Ār could arrive at his own conclusion. And the conclusions we arrive at by our own manana will be more firm than just what we hear by Sravana. That is why Bhagavan gave that more indirect answer. But what he means when he says, this path is suitable only for pakvis, only those who are suited to this path will be attracted to this path. That's all it means. It's as simple as that. So we should not be disheartened. That's why when I asked Nāṇ Ār, his first thing was to say, have no doubt about this. If you're attracted to this path, this is the path for which you're meant. So as I say, I wanted to say that just to put all that in more context. Now I'll come to answer the questions I've been asked. I will start with the questions that from June, but I wasn't able to answer, but I didn't have time to answer last month. So the first question was asked by Sushil Motwani. Did Bhagavan advocate idol worship? It depends what you mean by advocate. That is, Bhagavan of his own accord did not recommend any practice other than self-investigation and self-surrender, because in Bhagavan's experience, this is the direct and simple path. However, for those who are not attracted to this path, he acknowledged that other paths are suited to those who are not attracted to this path. And whenever, that is, Bhagavan justified idol worship. For example, once a very sincere Muslim came to Bhagavan and asked, isn't Hindus worship idols? Isn't it wrong to worship a stone or a piece of clay or a piece of metal as God? Isn't that blasphemy? Bhagavan said, if you think idol worship is wrong, then first you should give up idol worship before criticizing other people's idol worship. And that Muslim, Bhagavan, I've never worshipped any idol. I'm a very devout Muslim. We don't worship idols at all. Then Bhagavan said, what are you doing every day? You get up in the morning, you wash your face, you brush your teeth, you have a bath, and then you put on nice clean clothes, and then you eat something, and then you go about your day and you come back, you have a bath again. You take so much care of this body, giving it a bath, giving it clothing, giving it food. Why do you take so much care of this body? Because I am this body. I have to take, who will take care of this body if I don't take care of it? Then Bhagavan said, just like you take this body to be yourself, though this body is not what you actually are. Do you think you're really this body? And the Muslim said, no, I don't. Bhagavan said, you believe that after the death of this body, are you going to come to an end? No, after death we go to heaven, that he said. Then Bhagavan said, then you admit you're not this body, but you're worshipping this body as if it were yourself. What are they doing in temples when they worship idols? They are giving the idol a bath. They put nice clean clothing on it. They offer it food, just like you are doing to your body. So long as you take your body to be yourself, there's no wrong in taking a God to be a form. That is, we cannot. So in verse 4 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Bhagavan says, Uruvam tānayin, uluhu paramatran. If oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. If oneself is not a form, who can see their forms and how? That is, so long as we take ourselves to be a form, we cannot conceive of a formless God. Even the very idea that God is a form, that is an idea. Ideas are just mental forms. So everyone, so long as we have limited ourselves as this body, we cannot but have a limited conception of God. Yes, everyone says God is infinite. But can the mind, for us, infinite is just an idea. Can we grasp what is infinity? We can't, because how can the finite mind understand what is infinity? So it's whatever, so long as we rise as ego, whatever idea we have of God is an imperfect idea. We cannot know God as he is without knowing ourselves as we are, because what God actually is only ourselves. So long as we take ourselves to be a form, there is no wrong in worshipping God as a form. In fact, it's appropriate. Why? Because if you're trying to worship a very abstract concept of God, it's difficult to relate to abstract concepts. It's difficult to have devotion to abstract concepts. At least for most people it is. So people need something more concrete. So if you give God a form, if you say Krishna is God, or Rama is God, or Jesus is God, or Shiva is God, whatever, you give some name and form to God, it's much easier for you then to relate to that form in a personal way. And love, the pure love is beyond That is, pure love is infinite, so it's beyond all persons. But at the human level, we experience love at a personal level. To have a personal relationship with God, it is useful to take God to be a person, though that is not the ultimate truth. Neither is God a person, nor are we a person. But so long as we take ourselves to be a person, there's no wrong in taking God to be a person. And as a person, he has a name and he has a form, and so it's appropriate to worship that name and form. So Bhagavan was not opposed to idol worship. Bhagavan was not opposed to any practice, provided the practice is nishkamya. If you're doing some practice for that, in many people who worship God or who do other spiritual practices, even yoga or such things. People who do yoga, often they're doing yoga in order to gain power. People who worship God, it's because they're for the fulfillment of their desires. That's all kamya bhakti. So Bhagavan didn't encourage kamya bhakti, but even kamya bhakti Bhagavan didn't condemn, because when people are at that stage of spiritual development, kamya bhakti is the appropriate thing for them. At least they're having a relationship with God. If you're asking God for this and that, give me health, give me wealth, enable me to pass my exams, enable me to have a nice husband or wife, or to have good children and to get my children married, all these things, these kamyata aims, and after I die, let me go to heaven and have a happy life after death. All these aims, at least when you're asking God for these, so you're beginning to establish a relationship with God. Later, when your love for God matures, this asking God for this and that will drop off, and you'll come to understand greater than all anything. If God is giving you all these things you ask for, is not God greater than the gifts he's giving you? So slowly the kamya bhakti will become nishkamya bhakti. So people are at different stages of spiritual development. But Bhagavan's teaching, Bhagavan's teachings are the very highest. When in Upadēśa Undiyār, for example, when he starts talking about the path of bhakti, he starts from nishkamya bhakti. He says in verse 3, Kātanukākam nishkarmiya karma. That is nishkarmiya karma done without desire for the result of that action. But kātanukākam means done for God. So it implies done for the love of God. So Bhagavan, the real bhakti marga starts from when it becomes nishkamya. So Bhagavan starts from there, and he said that nishkamya bhakti, that nishkamya karma done for the love of God, will purify the mind and show the way to liberation. What is the way to liberation? As he said in the previous verse, in verse 2, karma does not give liberation. So no action is going to give liberation. Then what is the way to liberation? The only way is Atma-vichara, is self-investigation and self-surrender. Because in self-investigation and self-surrender are not actions. That is when, in order to surrender ourselves, we need to turn our attention within. When we turn our attention within, ego thereby subsides. So the subsidence of ego is not an action, but the cessation of action. So Atma-vichara and Atma-samarpanam, they are not actions. They are letting go of all actions and just subsiding back into our source. So that is the way to liberation. But in order to understand that, we need a certain degree of purity of mind. That degree of purity of mind is gained by nishkarmiya karma done for the love of God. What is the nishkarmiya karma? He then goes on to enumerate it. Nishkarmiya karma done by body is puja. Done by speech is japa. Done by mind is dhyana. And in this order, each one is more efficacious in purifying the mind. This is what Bhagavan is explaining in the early verse of Upadēśa Undiyār. But then, as he says in verse 8 of Upadēśa Undiyār, rather than anyabhava, ananyabhava is best among all. What does anyabhava mean? Anyabhava means, anya means what is other, means what is other than ourselves by implication. Bhava means, in that context, means meditating. So what it bhava, Anya Bhava implies there, meditating on God or worshipping God as something other than oneself. Rather than that, Ananya Bhava, in which he is I. That is recognizing that God is not something other than ourselves. He's that which is shining in our heart as I. So meditating on him as not other than ourselves, that's not other than I. In other words, meditating only on I, which is Atma-vichara, is best among all, and etianum ultimum. So idol worship has its place. So Bhagavan, though Bhagavan didn't explicitly advocate idol worship, he for those for whom it is suited, he supported them in their practice. He supported everyone, and whatever practice was suited to their level of maturity. But of his own accord, what he advocated is only this path, because this is the best among all. This path of Ananya Bhava, or Atma-vichara, otherwise called Atma-vichara, that is meditating on nothing other than ourselves, meditating only on ourselves. This is the best among all. But other practices are also, they're suitable to us at different levels of our spiritual development. But having come to Bhagavan, why have we been brought to Bhagavan? Because we've been through all these things. And now it is time for us to come to the more advanced class of Atma-vichara. So if we're attracted to Bhagavan and his teachings, it's not wrong to still, we can worship, we can put up a picture of Bhagavan and do ritual worship if that appeals to us. No wrong in that at all. But when we worship the form of Bhagavan, we should remember what that form came here to teach. Bhagavan isn't just God. Bhagavan is Guru. That is, God is there to answer all our prayers. Guru is there to turn us back within, to know what we actually are, and to know that no prayers are necessary, because we are already that infinite happiness. So having come to Bhagavan's path, we should at least begin to introduce this Atma-vichara and Atma-samarpanam, self-investigation and self-surrender. We should begin to introduce these into our path. Even if we want to continue doing other practices, that's according to what appeals to us. But we should begin cultivating a taste for this simple path of self-investigation and self-surrender. This is what Bhagavan has taught us. The next question I've been asked is, Andrew has asked, as I said, this a couple of months ago he asked this. I'm sorry for the delay in replying to these questions. Andrew asked, I experience sadness when I see photos of Sri Bhagavan seated on animal skins. My understanding is that he did this in response to some devotee's wishes, but how should I resolve the sadness it brings to me? Yes, your understanding is correct. Bhagavan did this in response to the wishes of devotees. Bhagavan was not of his own accord. Bhagavan is the simplest of simple. That is why people wanted him to sit on tiger skin or whatever. That is in yoga and some other beliefs. They believe that the animal skin which a yogi sits on shows the level of development of the yogis. So some yogis sit on a deer skin. That means they've controlled the mind to a certain extent. But being seated on a tiger skin, only the jnani is suited to be seated on the tiger skin, because the jnani has conquered the tiger of the mind. So there's a symbolism connected with this. In those days, tigers were much more common in India, and they weren't an endangered species as they are today. And for villagers who lived near jungles where tigers lived, tigers were an ever-present threat. Firstly, tigers would kill their livestock, and sometimes if a tiger was hungry, it would attack a man, and then it would become a man-eater. If a tiger has once attacked a person, they will have to try and kill it, because if they don't kill it, sooner or later it's going to kill another person. Once the tiger has a taste for human flesh and blood, they'll continue attacking even people. So there was also self-defense there. So it was in the old days, it was the job of rajas, of the kings, of the rich people, of the kshatriyas. They had to protect the villagers, and one of the things they had to protect from was dangerous animals like tigers. So that's why in ancient times tigers used to be killed, but they weren't such an endangered species, so they weren't. Just like tigers were killing other people, people were killing tigers to defend themselves from tigers. So we need to understand the cultural background. Of course, nowadays, when tigers are endangered species, the one species that is really dangerous in the world today, what is the one species that is destroying the whole environment in which all species live? It is this human species. We are the most dangerous animals nowadays, because with our addiction to fossil fuels and everything, we are destroying the very environment on which not only we, but all other species depend. So we are the most dangerous species nowadays. But in old days, when in more rural communities, and when the populations were much lower and tigers were much more, tigers were dangerous. They were a danger to people, and they were a danger to people's livelihood because they would kill livestock and so on. So we need to understand it in the cultural background. But so people brought tiger skin. Well, someone brought a tiger skin to Bhagavan and wanted him to sit on it. That tiger was not killed just for that purpose. It would have been tigers were killed and skins were available. Tigers were killed for other reasons, and those skins were available. So someone had purchased a tiger skin and brought it to Bhagavan and wanted him to sit on it. So we need to understand the context. Yes, it is sad to see animals being killed. But again, as I said, we need to understand it in the context of the times in which it happened. The modern times are different. Bhagavan himself was Bhagavan exemplified in his own life perfect ahimsa. Well, as perfect as, of course, Bhagavan's ahimsa is perfect ahimsa, because himsa means harm. What is the root of all harm, of all himsa, is our rising as ego. As soon as we rise as ego, we bring in all this world of multiplicity, in which there are predators and preys and there's conflict between species, and there's conflict within species, even within our human species. How many conflicts we have, how many wars we have, how many we kill each other, and we develop more and more powerful weapons. We use our technology to find better and better ways of killing people. So we are really a terrible species. But this is the nature of the world. The world is always a place of conflict. That is, animals compete for their livelihood. The herbivores, the animals that are mainly vegetarian, they eat the plant foods. But if there were no predators, the population of other animals would grow too much, and they would then eat all the vegetation, and then they'd be starving because there's no vegetation. So it's all part of the balance of nature, the predator and prey and everything. This is the nature of the world we create when we rise as ego. So the origin of all himsa is our rising as ego. And rising as ego is also sometimes described as Brahmahati. Brahmahati means killing Brahman. Because, of course, Brahman is never killed. Brahman is always as it is. But from our perspective, Brahman is as good as dead. Because instead of experiencing ourselves as Brahman, we're experiencing ourselves as this little person. So we, Brahman, have now limited ourselves as this little person. So, in effect, this is Brahmahati. So the very rising of ego is the first himsa. So Bhagavan was the only one who observed perfect himsa because he didn't rise as ego. And also in Bhagavan's outward life, he practiced perfect ahimsa. He lived a very strictly vegetarian life, and even though milk was consumed in the ashram, the cows were treated not as they are treated nowadays in the dairy industry. They were treated very kindly, and even after they became old and too old to bear calves, they would continue to care for them in their old age. So it was with proper care that the cows were, even nowadays in ashram, the cows in ashram, among all the cows in the world, the cows in Ramana ashram are very, very fortunate because they live nice life, well taken care of, They provide milk for Bhagavan's puja and everything, and they are given a home from womb to tomb, literally. So it's that is ahimsa milk production. But nowadays, most milk production is very, very far from ahimsa. That is why many, though Bhagavan was not a vegan, many devotees of Bhagavan are vegan, because nowadays the times are different. So we have to adapt ourselves to the times. So I understand, Andrew, I understand the sadness you feel when you see this, but I hope that putting all this in context maybe helps to resolve the sadness a little, and to remember that Bhagavan is the very embodiment of ahimsa. And if we want to observe perfect ahimsa, we should stop rising as ego. And how to stop rising as ego? Only by clinging fast to self-attentiveness and thereby surrendering ourselves completely. That is the only way to avoid himsa completely. The next question, Rahul Dravid has asked, there's a story that in his first visit to Arunachala, Bhagavan went straight to the sanctum sanctorum and physically hugged the lingam. Did Bhagavan confirm this? That's one question. And the other question is, would it be right to say that Venkataraman's association with Arunachala was of many lifetimes? Regarding the first question, nobody saw Bhagavan entering the temple and going to the sanctorum and embracing the linga. It was Bhagavan himself who said this. However, though Bhagavan said this, when he told it, he said this should not be made publicly known, because according to the customs of temple worship, only the priests of that is, to each temple, a certain set of families of priests are attached to that temple, and only those priests are qualified to worship in that temple. So no one else can touch the linga. So though Bhagavan is a Brahmin and a brahmachari, in their view, it would be a pollution if they knew that Bhagavan had come and embraced the linga. And if the linga is polluted, they have to arrange for a kumbhabhishekam, which is a very, very elaborate a ritual. The whole, it's a kumbhabhishekam for a big temple like Tiruvannamalai. It's a months and months of preparation and that are required, and it's a very, very elaborate affair. So though Bhagavan told this to a few close devotees, he said this shouldn't be made public knowledge. So for a long time it wasn't known, but since that time there have been several kumbhabhishekams. So now we can say it openly. We don't have to keep hush hush about it. But Bhagavan, yes, Bhagavan did confirm it. Bhagavan himself said that when he entered the temple, it was midday, so hot sun. So usually the temple will be kept open in the daytime, but the sanctum, because in the daytime the priests won't remain in the temple, won't remain in the sanctum. So they lock their inner sanctum and go away. That day, unusually, the inner sanctum had been left unlocked. So when Bhagavan entered the temple, there was no one about. He went straight in and he entered the inner sanctum. He went and embraced the linga. Bhagavan himself is that linga. Bhagavan himself is Arunachala. That linga is nothing but the hill in the form of a linga. And Bhagavan is nothing but the hill in the form of a human, in a human form. So they're all one and the same. So it's perfectly appropriate that Bhagavan did that. But in the views of certain orthodox people, it may seem to be inappropriate. That's why it wasn't made public knowledge. So yes, Bhagavan definitely, he came and he did embrace the linga on that first day. That is before he went and when he went out to the temple again, then he met someone who said, Swami, do you want to have your head shaved? Which was an unusual thing to ask, because Bhagavan was dressed as an ordinary Brahmin boy. Why would he want to have his head shaved? But for some reason, someone asked him and took him to the Ayankulam Tirtham, where a barber was, and Bhagavan's head was shaved, and people, it's wrongly reported that Bhagavan then threw the money and the sweets in the tank. That is not so. Bhagavan did have a little bit of money, but he had got from Murti Krishna Bhagavata. He gave that money away, or he just left that money somewhere. He threw the sweets in the tank to feed the fish there. He didn't throw the money in the tank. That is actually wrongly put in some biographies. And he removed the sacred thread because he was no longer identified as I am a Brahmin or anything. He removed his sacred thread, he removed his dhoti, and he just tore a piece of the dhoti and wore it as a loincloth. So yes, Bhagavan did go. The first thing Bhagavan did was go straight to the temple and embrace the linga. That is certainly true. Regarding the second question, would it be right to say that Venkataraman's association with Arunachala was of many lifetimes? Yes, I think it's no doubt that is definitely so. That is, Bhagavan says from in the first verse of Arunachala Aṣṭakam, Ari Varu Siruvaya, that is from the age of not knowing anything, before knowing any other thing, Bhagavan, Arunachala shone in his mind as something Miha Peridu, very great. Ari Varu Siruvaya, from the young age of not knowing anything, Siruvaya Adu Mudal. From that time, Arunachala Miha Peridu in Arivinilanga. Arunachala shone in his mind as something very, very great. Why? Because of that association with Arunachala through so many previous births. So definitely the Bhagavan's association. But you worded the question very nicely. You asked to say, was Venkataraman's association? Yes, that ego that took itself to be Venkataraman had been a devotee of Arunachala for many lifetimes. We can infer. But if you had asked, was Bhagavan's association with Arunachala for many lifetimes, I would say no, because Bhagavan had no many lifetimes. Bhagavan is Arunachala himself, has appeared in human form. So for Bhagavan, there are not many lifetimes. But many lifetimes were for the ego who took itself to be Venkataraman, but on that day in Madurai, surrendered itself completely to Arunachala, was thereby swallowed as Arunachala, and that body and mind that was previously taken to be I by that ego was then taken over by Arunachala, and Arunachala, what shone through that body from that day onwards was only Arunachala. So Arunachala and Ramana are one. They're one and inseparable. So it's not a case of many lifetimes. Eternally they are one. They always were one. They always will be one, because they alone are ekkameva advityam. They are that which is one only without a second. That is Arunachala Ramana. So one and inseparable. And then the last question from June is Harish Subramaniam asked, have you experienced the self? Do you know a jnani I can meet in Tiruvannamalai or elsewhere? Well, first answer the first question. Yes, I know a jnani in Tiruvannamalai. That jnani is in two forms in Tiruvannamalai. One form is in the form of Arunachala, which Jnana Sambandha, the great saint Jnana Sambandha, praised as Jnana Tiralai Nindra Peruman, the great Lord who stands as a vast mass of jnana. So Arunachala is jnana itself, and Bhagavan is jnana itself. So in those two forms in Tiruvannamalai, jnani is always available. But when Bhagavan was asked by people about jnani, whether this person is jnani or that person is jnani, Bhagavan sometimes used to say, there is only one jnani. You are that, tattvamasi. That is, we cannot find jnana outside ourselves. Jnana we have to find within ourselves. In the 13th verse of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Bhagavan says, Jnanamam tane me. Oneself who is jnana alone is real. So we ourselves are jnana. Jnana means pure awareness. That is what we actually are. So we shouldn't be looking for jnanas outside. Why why does our own self appear outwardly in the form of Bhagavan, only to tell us to turn within? So if we are looking for jnanis outside, we have not understood Bhagavan's teaching. The jnani is not a physical body. The jnani is not a person. Bhagavan often used to say, jnana me jnani. That means jnana alone is a jnani. What is jnana? Jnana is pure awareness. What can know pure awareness? Only pure awareness can know pure awareness. So the jnani is nothing but pure awareness. Tanai iritale tanai aridalam. Bhagavan says in verse 26 of Upadēśa Undiyār, being oneself alone is knowing ourselves. So we can know what we actually are is jnana, and we can know that jnana only by being that jnana. So we shouldn't be looking for jnanis outside. Regarding whether I have experienced the self, if you're referring to me, Michael will never experience the self, because Michael is the name of a person. No person can know the self. The person is a bundle of 5 sheaths. All those 5 sheaths are jada. What makes Michael seem to be sentient is ego. It is ego that says, I am Michael, or I am Harish. So that Harish can never know the self. Michael can never know the self. That I, which is aware of itself as I am Harish or I am Michael, can that know itself? Yes and no. As ego, we cannot know what we actually are. But as ego, we need to try to know what we actually are. When we know what we actually are, we will thereby cease to be ego and remain as we actually are. Because ego is the adjunct mixed awareness. I am this body. I am this person. I am Harish. I am Michael, or whoever. That is ego. That adjunct mixed awareness is ego. The same awareness, the same pure awareness I am without adjuncts, that is the self, as you call it, Atma-swarupa. That is what we actually are. And as Bhagavan says in verse 25 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, knowing oneself without adjuncts is knowing God. God means ourself, what we actually are. So we need to know. There's nothing new for us to know. That is, even now we know ourselves. The problem is, instead of knowing ourselves as we actually are, we know ourselves mixed with adjuncts, as I am this or I am that. So drop Harish and hold on to I am. That is self-realization. So as I say, Michael will never know, will never experience the self. And the self is not an object that could be experienced by Michael. That is, neither is Michael something that can experience anything, because Michael is jada. Even that ego that is aware of itself as I am Michael cannot know that as it is, because this ego must try to know what it actually is. But when it knows what it actually is, it ceases to be ego. If you see a rope and mistake it to be a snake, how can you see what it actually is? You need to look at it very carefully. When you look very carefully at the snake, what do you see? Oh, it's not a snake, it's just a rope. Likewise, if we look at ego carefully enough, if we investigate ego keenly enough, we will find there's no such thing as ego at all, but what appeared as ego is just pure awareness. That is what we actually are. So that we have to find within ourselves. Don't go looking for jnanis outside, because so long as you look for jnanis outside, you're taking a person to be a jnani. Taking jnana to be a person is itself ajnana. So you cannot remove your ajnana by looking outside. You need to look within. Any true jnani will not say, come to me, I will give you moksha. The jnani will say, you yourself are moksha, know yourself. So we need to understand Bhagavan's teachings deeply, not just take them superficially. And there are all sorts of people are running here and there, believing this person is a jnani, that person is a jnani. It's about 45 years since I first came to Tiruvannāmalai. And since that time, I have seen so many people who come to Tiruvannāmalai. They come, first they're very interested in Bhagavan's teaching, then they hear about this this Maharaj or this Babaji or Papaji or something, and they go running away to all these things. If we understand Bhagavan, no jnani other than Bhagavan is necessary. Because what is the purpose of Guru? The Guru's purpose is to turn us back within. So Bhagavan is the eternal Guru. Bhagavan is, just because Bhagavan has left his body, he's no less Guru than he was when he was with body, because Bhagavan is not the body. His teaching from day one was, I am not this body. So if we take Bhagavan to be limited to that body, then we can be, then I have to find some other jnani. Bhagavan is not limited to the body. Bhagavan is that which is ever shining in our heart as I, and that alone is jnana. So if you want to find the jnani in yourself. See yourself as a jnani. That is the only way. We cannot know Bhagavan as he is until we know ourselves as we are. Because what is Bhagavan? Bhagavan is ourselves as we actually are. So in order to know Bhagavan, we need to know ourselves. And when we know ourselves, that itself is jnana. There's no jnani separate from jnana. How can there be a separate jnani? Jnani, as Bhagavan said, jnana me jnani. Jnana alone is a jnani. So people have so many, with half-baked understanding of Bhagavan's teachings, they come to so many wrong conclusions. We need to study Bhagavan's teachings deeply. We need to put them into practice, but we need to think deeply about what he's taught us in order to understand them correctly. Because if we don't understand them correctly, we'll be allowing our mind to go after this and that, thinking, I must find a jnani outside. Bhagavan has said satsang is good, so I must look for a jnani to have satsang with. Satsang, Bhagavan has also said, Atma-vichara. Atma alone is satsang. You yourself as so Atma-vichara. Atma alone is sat. We ourselves are sat. So if you want to have satsang, what is the best satsanga? Atma-sanga. What is Atma-sanga? Holding on to I am, being self-attentive. That is the best of all satsangas. So we need to understand Bhagavan's teachings deeply and clearly. And we need to understand whatever Bhagavan has taught in the context of his whole teaching. Otherwise, we get misled by these people who say, there's a jnani here, there's a jnani there. How can we know who is a jnani? There are so many bogus jnanis about. There are many more bogus jnanis than there are genuine jnanis. So the safest course is to stop looking outside for jnanis, look within, as Bhagavan taught us. Find the jnana within yourself. Jnana means pure awareness. You are that. So look within yourself. Don't look outside. If you feel you want outside support, what more outside support can you get from Bhagavan himself, Bhagavan and his teachings? You cannot find any greater support than that.
Thank you so much, Michael. I think this has been one of your very exciting and wonderful sessions. There are a number of people expressing their thankfulness and gratitude to you for all the wisdom and responses.
All thanks to Bhagavan. It's Bhagavan's wisdom, not my wisdom. I don't know anything except the little I've been able to understand of Bhagavan's teachings.